Okay, here we are, and we are live on Facebook. Um, Hello, anyone who is joining us virtually in that space. We're back again this week with our New Jerusalem discussion group. And this week we are tackling the topic of the Holy Supper. These last week and this week are really the only two chapters in New Jerusalem that specifically reference kind of Christian practices and the practices of the church and how that lives and fits into the vision of the new church that is descending and that we are seeking to be a part of. So last week we talked about baptism, and this week we talk about communion, the Holy Supper, the sacrament of bread and wine. And I'm happy to be joined this week by Reverend Shada Sullivan in Wilmington, Delaware. If you want to say hi.
Hi everyone.
There's
Happy to be
Shada.
here.
And I also have a special guest this week, someone who is very connected to me, but not so connected to the Swedenborgian movement. He's an Episcopal priest, my husband, the Reverend Dr. Ted Cole.
Hello, folks. Happy to be with you.
I was happy to invite Ted this week because the Holy Supper is a big part of his life as an Episcopalian. It's something he celebrates every week in church, and something that's very meaningful to him. So I thought it'd be a fun week to have you participating with us. And hi, Ralph, joining us online. So we can start anywhere. You know, in talking about these real practices, I think it was helpful last week when we talked about baptism to talk about when we were baptized, what that meant to us kind of personally in our own lives. And so this is also room for what has this sacrament meant to you in your own personal life and your ministry, and then getting into, it's actually kind of a short chapter, so there's a bit to dig into in terms of what Swedenborg says about it. But maybe we want to start there. I guess I would just start us off with, I know my first memory of having communion was as a teenager at a teen retreat where, and I can still just remember the feeling of the room. It was like, candlelight. And here I am just like piled together with all of the people I love the most in the world. And I remember the Reverend Steve Palt sitting at the front and saying the words of institution, speaking about Jesus and the bread and the wine. And what I most remember is him very honestly telling us how much he loved us and how much this sacrament was kind of made more powerful and more real because we were all there and because we all loved each other so much. And then the little paper cups with the juice and the crackers going around. And anyway, that's my first recollection of communion. And I think for me, it always is deeply, deeply tied to community, to kind of relationship. And there's just something so beautiful about this, the body, our bodies, Jesus's body, and then this body of this food that we're sharing together. So I would just offer that up as an experience of mine, and happy to hear yours. We also have Renee and Tassie joining us. I'm glad you're here with us today. Ted or Shada, would you like to jump in with any reflections?
You just go first, Shada?
Sure. I don't actually remember my first time taking Holy Supper, but I do remember so clearly like a really helpful evolution for myself that I experienced like through the formation of training for ministry, which is that so before that, my practice had been, in other Swedenborgian communities that Holy Supper was taken like maybe quarterly or monthly at the most. And for me, like I'd always really connected deeply with the practice, and because it was so rare, it got heightened. It got really heightened, and so my experience of it was always so emotional, almost like overwhelmingly so. It was difficult for me to participate. But then when I was doing my field ministry at a Lutheran church, they did do communion every week in one of their services. And I loved actually experiencing the ordinariness of it. I think that balanced things out for me really nicely. Like just doing it every week, I'm like, okay, this can be something that is meaningful, but also like just a real part of my life, and it just, yeah, it just balanced me out a little bit, and I was able to experience it differently and helpfully. So I like the sense of it both being something that is so sacred and beautiful, but also something that is ordinary in the best way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was a helpful.
I love that. I think I had a similar experience, and I think it's within the Swedenborgian tradition, there is this tradition of, like you say, having it once a year or twice a year, in part because we lift up this idea that the sacrament will be made more powerful because we prepare, because we make ourselves ready, and we go through a process of repentance. And while on one level that's lovely, and it's I think meaningful to think about what we bring to the sacrament. It also, I think, kind of sets up like an unrealistic expectation that, well, given enough time, I will be able to figure out all of the sins that I've ever, that I will be able to perfect myself. And it can kind of get a little perverted. And I think it's good to have that balance of like, yes, there's preparation, there's presence, and it's cyclical. And God's doing it. And so it can happen in the ordinary, and it can happen in the week to week, is a more natural part of our lives than, I think we can fall into that and I certainly can, as a perfectionist, that I could, really get there and then it would be this perfect moment, which can maybe set us up for it being a little too much, be a little too overwhelming, as you're describing, a little too emotional, a little too many stakes or something on it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. What's your reflection, Ted, as someone who celebrates it every week and sees it more consistent in life?
I think the invitation for us in the Episcopal Church to communion every week reflects the idea that we need to have habits, faithful habits, sacred habits that help us to recognize the blessedness of the everyday, and that kind of helps us keep our consciousness of God's love week by week. Just the natural recognition that the week wears us down. Monday through Saturday wears us down. And if we want to keep the love of God and the love of others alive in our hearts, we need help. We need support. And there's the way in which communion stands in this time apart from time, right? Because very similar words week by week, and yet it's meeting us in the time that we're living, day by day, week by week. And I'm in my own journey. I came into ministry resisting the idea for many, many years. And when I finally experienced a clear sense of call to it, it actually resonated with having worked in restaurants for, back then, I think 10, 15 years. I ended up 21 years working in restaurants. And, restaurants are all about food, right? And the rhythm of food. And the idea that if you work in a place where people experience the joy of fellowship and loving, caring service, and good food, they will come. And, you as the member of the staff working there will be enriched by sharing it with them. And just in a clarifying moment, I saw that's what ministers do, right? They're working, the church is God's restaurant, right? And this is where people come to be fed and to be made aware of the fellowship of Christ, and that fellowship, how they can share that with one another and to grow in it, to be fed and to grow in it. So communion is this, and this was a change for the Episcopal Church. This was a change. Not that you need to know, insider Episcopal baseball. Well, we currently operate from our 1979 prayer book, which that's no longer so new. But when I started going to church, it was new in my teenage years, and it's put communion at the center of our worship life. The weekly regular celebration of communion. And before that, it was more like how you all experience, was how Protestant churches, throughout the world experience communion. You do once a month or once a quarter. It was a rare occurrence. And we had morning prayer and evening prayer, which the Anglican tradition is rightly famous for, our services of morning prayer and evening prayer. But it was a new idea that communion should be a regular celebration of the community, the main weekly celebration of the community. That was new. And it's the only church I've known. So I until the pandemic, then I experienced what it was like the other way. And it has its pluses, but I can't imagine my weekly journey as a Christian, let alone as a minister, without communion being there to be of nourishment and consciousness raising and a manifestation of God's love, both for me to share and for me to receive.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I didn't realize it was such a new, I didn't know that it was a relatively new development. I want to bring us to the line. We've been hearing this a lot in our reading of New Jerusalem so far about like what the church primarily is, that the church is the connection point between God and humankind. And in this chapter, that's reiterated that actually the Holy Supper is instituted as very much that connection point between God and humankind. And that connection occurs through eating, And when I was speaking last week or on Sunday about baptism, I was kind of encouraging. One of the things that Swedenborg brings so deeply is like, it's not about the ritual. Like the ritual is not going to by itself make us new and change everything. And he reiterates this in the whole, that if we don't have, if it doesn't mean any, if we don't believe that there's something meaningful in this, it won't be meaningful, that it's not a transaction where we get the supper and then, okay, we're connected, we're tied in. But when we're tied in, how will we celebrate that? How will we celebrate that connection? We can baptize our children and we can have the Holy Supper, that these rituals these sacraments are a way of manifesting, celebrating, participating, kind of living out this connection that we can choose, and that there's power in choosing to participate in these acts, not because we think they give us some kind of special insider something, but that they help us in that kind of intentional journey. I've been thinking about these two sacraments as a way of signifying and then celebrating the intentionalness of the journey that's not in our heads, which I think as Swedenborgians is so helpful. It's not in knowing the answer or know it, but it's just in receiving it, just in taking it in, eating it. And that there's a correspondence in that physical act. It's kind of mysterious. It's kind of, it's individual, but it's also collective. We prepare the meal together. I'm struck by your idea of the church as God's restaurant. And Ted and I have talked about this because we both worked in restaurants for a long time before going into ministry. And my vision of ministry when I was right before I was ordained, what I shared was not that it was God's restaurant, but but as a minister, I wanted to throw dinner parties, which I guess is slightly different. It's a little more amateur, like I'm not the expert chef at the restaurant preparing them in. And I think this is partly my personality. I bristle against the idea that ministers, we know the recipe, or that the church, has it, but that we are called to bring people to the table, and that something happens when we're all at the table together. And maybe today, if I was writing my vision ministry, again, I would say, I want to throw dinner party. I want to throw potlucks. I want everybody to bring something to the table. but I think I could see and I could feel even then that there was something about eating together, sharing in the experience of recognizing our dependence really on food, to be on something outside of us to live, and that substance is earthly, and also kind of is heavenly. Um, so yeah, it's good. Holy Supper seems like a good idea. How do we get and we can see how it's not been that was the other thing I shared in my sermon on Sunday, was like that the things of the church equally kind of conceal and reveal God in some, that we hear that kind of idea that, and I think that's true for baptism in that it reveals God in this beautiful scene of we're washed and showing the process of regeneration, but it can conceal God when we start to use it as a thing that sets us apart, or that, and I would say with the Holy Supper, that's also been true through the history of the church. It reveals God's grand welcome and how dependent we are. And we know for many people, they've been left out of the table. They have not been allowed reception because of rules of the church. And even if that's not true in our particular church settings, the memory of that truth kind of still lives in people's psyches and bodies. And I wonder, as clergy, how do we hold that revealing and concealing? Do you see that playing out in your communities?
Well, it's certainly like something of a dance, right? Like, anything that we do repetitively or habitually has the potential to become rote, right? No matter what it is. And, there's just a sense of, like, is in my not fully showing up to this, right? God is somehow concealed in my whatever distraction, or my, or just a sense, sometimes things, their meaning ebb and flows for us a little bit. And it feels like God is concealed in that. But I think what we understand theologically, of course, is that God is steadfastly present no matter what. And I love the way in the chapter specifically that it was so focused on, or at least my translation calls linking. Like it was all about linking. And I feel like, oh, okay, this is an intentional practice of mutuality, right? Like the whole point of it is us showing up, being open to God so that there's this mutual connection, us showing up and experiencing mutual connection with others. It just, it really, yeah, it just seemed to, I seemed to hear that in a new way, I think, when I was reading today, just recognizing, oh, okay, so that makes it extra powerful and horrible when communion is withheld, because this sense of people taking taking upon themselves the power to sever mutuality, right? Or imagining that they do. What a terrible kind of overreach that is, us deciding that God should not be allowed to be present and connected. Not that we really can decide and affect that, but pretending that we can and making edicts that somehow we can. Just seeing it in that light, the withholding, it's so cold. And yeah, that's where my head is at when I think about that.
It's an unfortunate part of our legacy of as being members of, thinking of ourselves as members of this church that has been branching off, for hundreds of years, thousands of years.
So from the history of the practice of communion, that the earliest Christians kept communion as something that you had to be brought into the innermost circle of the church to receive.
Right.
You didn't receive communion until you were baptized, and you had to have this long season of preparation, which became Lent in those of us who were keeping the liturgical year. And it was something of a mystery what happened at communion, and that resonated with a lot of how ancient religions practiced, and kept themselves. And the evolution of communion and where it stands in relationship to the people has unfolded across the centuries. And in the Episcopal Church, our canon law, what it says we should be doing is that we should be offering communion to those who've been baptized in the name of the Trinity. What's happened on the ground is many parishes felt this isn't in the spirit of Christ. This isn't in the spirit of the God who loves us all and meets us where we are. And we started to practice what's known as open communion, where the celebrant would say, you are welcome at this table wherever you are. And I found that spoke true to me. And if my first communion story would be receiving it when I was not yet baptized and experiencing God's grace and presence in that, but then making a commitment to pursue baptism before I would receive again. So it felt right to me to not exclude people, given my lived experience. But as a celebrant, I felt somewhat like there's a tension here, like something needs to be said about what's happening, right? An invitation has to be extended. Say, yeah, come, don't come, it's all okay. No, something else is happening. And so I came up with a phrase or a turn of phrase. If you feel God's presence in this moment, you are most welcome to be part of this meal. And in the reading was this idea, we love God because God calls us to love God. It's a gift that we're given that we get to give back. And that's a dynamic in communion that we try to make manifest. You know, the bread and the wine that's going to be blessed comes from the people, and it's brought to the altar and it's blessed, and then it's given back to the people. And so the love that we have for God is a gift of God to us. That's where it starts. And that, to me, resonated with, yeah, we need to say something about what's happening here, because there's a love that you're being invited to participate in freely. If you can say, yeah, if you recognize it and can say yes to it. And a lot of that language about in the readings about the conscious, the awareness of what's happening is what makes you participate in it, spoke in how I've been, as an Episcopal priest, trying to live with some authenticity in this era of open communion, honoring that, yes, Christ welcomes everyone, God welcomes everyone, and we're all children of God together. And we have to have some response to that to live into its fullness.
Yeah, and living to the fullness idea is interesting because, yeah, in the reading where it talked about that, if you approach communion and you're not necessarily fully into it, like God is still present and alongside you, but perhaps there's less of that mutuality occurring. And I do like this sense of like, I guess maybe even just a spectrum like that it's not like it's ever harmful, right? How can it be harmful to try to approach this ritual that is about mutuality? But that we have some agency in what we bring to it and what we experience from it. And I forgot where I was going with it, but I just appreciate this sense. There's like table stakes. God's there, right? Like, boom. And then, okay, like, what are we open to this time when we approach? Like, what are we focusing on? Maybe we have spent a lot of time, maybe it is, a Lenten period of reflection, or maybe we're exhausted and we just need to be like, I'm going to take this food in, I'm just going to take this presence, or, I think it's not explicitly spoken of in the reading, but I'm seeing an invitation to noticing the richness of possible experience that I haven't thought about necessarily so explicitly before, and I'm interested to keep on going with that.
Yeah. Karen Conger comments on Facebook that she attends a UMC church and their current minister goes out of their way to make it clear that all are welcome, even non-Christians are welcome to join in the sacrament, joining in the party, which kind of shifts to my perspective of I'm throwing dinner parties and everybody is welcome. And yeah, what is if we're having a celebration and we're sharing this food and it has this deep meaning for us, what is the harm and what is possibly the gift of all who are around, all who might be hungry to participate? I think you're bringing up an interesting and important tension, Ted, I think in the sacrament as sign of belonging, or a sign of something that you make your way into a community, and then this is one of the signs of participation,
And
kind of,
commit.
versus
Mhm.
creating community where there's that, where it's you know, versus the other dimension, I guess, which we're primarily focusing on today, and which has become more of the practice in many churches of everyone is here, who is here is welcome. And I think it makes me think of kind of the holding creative, there's a creative tension that has possibility. Because the truth is, you wouldn't be, if there weren't people who had chosen to be a part of this community and who make it happen, then it doesn't happen. You know, like the inner circle becomes the ones doing the work of making the meal happen. They become the sous chefs and the cooks and the participants in the preparation of the meal. But then anybody can show up at the restaurant. And I do see communion as a way, an invitational way of inviting people into the circle, but then also honoring the larger truth of God, that God's working kind of in all communities and all time and all space, regardless of whether we get into the middle circle of this community's living of that, or we are living kind of outside of that. And I certainly see that at the chapel. I mean, people often come to communion service who have no necessary understanding of the church or Christianity or anything, but are very moved by being welcome to that table, and being able to participate. And yeah, maybe that's part of the work, is holding both. Because I do hear the part, Ted, around kind of honoring the meaning, the depth of what's happening, and making a further commitment to let what's happening kind of transform our life. And I think maybe there's just a real delicate dance we all have to do as leaders, to hold both, to hold the deep meaning and the welcome. And maybe that's a big piece of the new church, is holding those both, instead of holding some kind of attitude like, we have the truth, we have the sacrament, and you must kind of check off these boxes to participate in this holy exchange, which feels like that's happening less and less, and at least it's not happening in the communities I choose to be a part of.
Well, on that note, I'd love to get your take on children and communion, because I've recently sort of experienced an evolution of my thought in practice, like in pastoring. We don't necessarily have at my church a Sunday school program where the children go out, right? So they're there, they're present for the entire service. And it felt like there was no way that I could exclude them, or wanted to exclude them from taking communion. Now, previous experience had been, more like, you do go through a first communion process, or at least like a confirmation process or something, and then you get to take communion. But I found there's just something so powerful, a lived theology that speaks to, you are welcome, like you are part of this community. Maybe you're not grown and you're not totally formed and all of that, but you are invited to be here and take, like, I found that there was just something so powerful about that. And it's true that maybe there's not a full understanding of what's happening, but where I am right now is that I privilege the experience of inclusion over the intellectual understanding of what they're doing. That's where I've landed right now. But I'd love to hear other people's takes on that.
I'm glad you've landed there, because I think little children taking communion is about the holiest thing you'll ever see. The church that Ted and I served at in Anchorage, big community, lots of kids, and just seeing them kind of run up there. And in the Episcopal Church, they make good communion bread. It's tasty, it's delicious, and there's just nothing sweeter. I mean, seeing my children take communion, it's very, very much a part of their that this is my church, you know, and this is my food and this is my place to be. I think it's really vital. I think we even need to have theological statements about it, that it's really important for that to be. And honestly, the further along on this spiritual journey I feel like we know God when we're children, and we start to know God again when we realize we don't know very much. But if we're saying that we get communion because we've worked it out theologically, that's even a problem. You know, like there is something about that. I mean, what it's a mystery. We're eating. It's not about words. It's not about intellect. It is about commitment and participation. And I think there is something as adults that there is like a moment when we do need to sort of choose, like, is this for me? Is this my thing? But I totally agree. I think communion is a wonderful way to teach about God to kids, because they know about eating. They know what that's something they understand, and they experience that feeling of being together with this community, receiving this gift. Is your experience similar, Ted, or?
It is, yeah. So the practice of having children receive communion in some ways follows naturally from we have baptism. We had baptism as the entrance right to the church, by which you fully become a member of the Christian church and the Episcopal church, and through which you have the privilege of receiving communion. So if a baby was baptized, of course, as soon as they were ready to receive it, you would share communion with them, which is different than the Roman Catholic tradition, for example. What's interesting is that I've had over the years some families who come from that Catholic tradition, and they don't want their children to receive until they've had some kind of preparation. So there's that tension again between wanting to be aware of what's happening and the invitation to participate. So we walked that line by offering a prepared communion program for, age appropriate for kids, in the 8 to 10 range, second grade-ish. After which for those who withheld from them, after which they would be free to receive communion. And I have a vivid memory of the church in Anchorage that Sage mentioned. I remember this happened while we were serving together, if it was before. We did a prepared communion celebration, and the kids they come up to the altar and they receive first. And then they became the ministers, and they just took over. They served everybody, right? The lay ministers and the preachers pushed everybody aside, right? They did everything. And very St. Mary's, very characteristic of that parish. But it was also lovely, because now I would argue, even if they couldn't articulate it intellectually, they were experiencing spiritually, we've received the love of God, and of course we want to share it. And everyone who was there at that service felt that, right? And was excited by it and energized by it. It was lovely. And in the end, I think it's all, dare I say, there are no rules about how God moves in the world, right? We have our suppositions, our senses of where we feel and see the Spirit. But in the end, I think we have to have a spirit of experimentation and openness to what's happening in any particular moment, or in any particular community, or in any particular family, or in any particular life, and create opportunities for God's love to manifest. And so there was a gift in having parents who didn't want their kids to receive until they'd been prepared. And so we went through that process, and then this thing happened out of it that wouldn't have happened if we didn't do it. The language that we use in the Episcopal Church is the sacraments are an outward and visible sign of an inward and a spiritual grace. And it's an occasion for experiencing God's love and presence. It's not a guarantee of it. And we're trying to just create conditions in which it can happen for those who are seeking. On our end, we're imperfect seekers, but God is always seeking us. So often we connect.
That's
all
beautiful.
the sacramental moments that we do. Yeah.
We have a couple lovely comments on Facebook. Barb is mentioning that just as with everything, our depth can grow. So the act of communion is just another step in our growth process. And then Renee shares, I believe this discussion points towards Swedenborg's theology of discrete degrees of knowing and experiencing. As children, we receive the Blessed Sacrament in innocence of heart, and later we can understand more intellectually, and then even later more deeply at the spiritual and celestial levels. Yeah. One thing that's unfolded for me that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on is, I don't know if it was the last time I celebrated communion or might have been not too long ago, at the chapel when I was celebrating communion, something tied to the service. I really just felt deeply kind of that, yes, we are doing this, and this is a moment of uniting the spiritual and the natural, and this is, God is present in this sacrament, and God is present in the bread that I eat at home with my family at the table, and in the water that I drink, and that I really have started to feel like ultimately it would be good to feel that all the time, that it would be good to feel that every time we eat and every time we drink, to see the sacredness of that receiving. And I I know that in saying that, sometimes it's like, well, does that mean we shouldn't do, I mean, if that's the ideal, then do we not do the, but I think it's not a this or that. It's that if we are celebrating this thing regularly, that hopefully it's sort of imprinting us to feel that sacredness. And I wonder if my journey with communion and with becoming a celebrant of that supper has played a role in my moving towards this kind of all the time feeling of the sacredness of food and drink, and receiving, being nourished by this world, by elements from this world. I mean, how magical, how amazing is that? I wonder if you guys could speak to that, or if that shows up for you at all in your life. I mean, it's not what Swedenborg's saying. He's definitely saying that this sacrament is unique and specific and necessary, in a way that sets it apart from other eating and drinking. I don't know, it's something I'm holding. And I don't know if it's something, and maybe it's not something you could ever teach, or maybe it's not something you could ever really convey. So that's why we have to do it, on Sundays at 11, or, in these kind of specific spaces and ways, because how could we move to a feeling of sacredness all the time? Maybe it's like, maybe the church has to be the special restaurant that you go to once in a while, and it sets it apart, or like lifts it out of the mundane or the ordinary. I just really wrestle with that if it's always set apart, then what do we do with those mundane moments? How do we bring it into the all the time? Because that's what's really important to me, is making it all the time. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think that tension exists, in a broader sense in Swedenborg's works too. He talks about worship itself, true worship being the living of a good life. But that, institutional worship is something that we set up for ourselves because we're human, right? We are just gonna definitely forget to be aware and to notice, and if maybe the all the time is the goal, right? I think there are some descriptions in heaven of angels who see the correspondences of everything before them all the time, and the reality just, somehow glows. It's like maybe that is sort of the goal of having a heightened awareness all the time, but how close we are to that, probably not very. So we institute these reminders, these habitual reminders, but I don't think having the reminders necessarily means that we shouldn't, as you say, try to cultivate exactly what we're being reminded about all the time, right? Like, but it still exists in tension, absolutely. I mean, there's a blessedness in like, I don't have, that the reminder exists, right? Like, oh, thank goodness I can come back to this if I have just completely not been present during my week. But I agree that the effort to be present and to experience the communion available to us in every moment is certainly a worthy goal as well, for sure.
It's definitely caught up with the idea of what is church for, and is Monday through, thinking about it, days of the week, right? Is Monday through Saturday to get you to Sunday, or is Sunday to get you to Monday through Saturday, right? And different churches have different theologies and different approaches to it, and some, traditions, not going to church on Sunday is a grievous sin, like that can put your soul at peril. Use language of salvation. And it's not how I've experienced it or seen it. Church is about nurturing the love of God in your heart to carry it with you every moment of every day as best you can. And I think the best of if you look at the broad sweep of Christian spirituality and tradition, the best of it is about the recognizing the sacramental quality of all of life, and giving thanks for the gift of life, and loving others out of that gratitude. And if that's the purpose, if that's what the fullness of a sacramental sensibility is, it can happen anywhere, anytime. And we see it more as we mature, as on that journey of growth and Swedenborgian language regeneration. You do that more and more, and that's it's striking to me if we think about communion, the Lord's Supper, where it occurs in the story, right? It occurs at the end, and it's a farewell meal, and it's to seal in the hearts of the disciples what Christ is doing with us and for us, what God is doing through Christ with us and for us, and it's incredibly effective. Here we are, thousands of years later, celebrating that meal, right? So it worked, right? As a means of remembrance and empowering and warming hearts and souls to keep this love alive. But that the passage that I forget which of the chapters it was where it came in, or the section headings, from John, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, that does not occur at the end, right? That's early in the teachings. And what do we do? Scholars would go with what in that space, scholars would, wonder about that. Why is this communion language showing up outside the communion table? But it offers the invitation that Jesus invites us into seeing this meal as a step towards living our life fully, right? Really taking him into us to be fed and transformed by him, that we might be more like him. And if that's what communion's about, then it's not us getting to Sunday, it's about Sunday getting into Monday through Saturday.
I was struck in the language in the chapter. There's the connection that this meal connects us, and it creates a partnership. I think that was another word that he uses in the book, that through receiving this and really feeling like we are receiving this Jesus, this guy who did these amazing things, who embodied the fullness of the divine. We get to take that into our own bodies, into our own lives, into our own reality. To me, that's one of the profound elements of the feast. And as we've said, some who really, and we all have different ways of really getting what that means. I'm sure that we've all taken communion in different states. And for me as a teenager, it was, this is a holy moment. These friendships, these loves, this food is good. It's worth celebrating, and yet there have been other times I've come to the communion table and I've been not feeling connected, or not having community around me, or not feeling like life is good. And I'm still taking it. It's still in my body, I think, and you spoke to that at the very beginning, Shada, like there is something lovely about it being a part of the ordinariness. It doesn't always have to be the high points, but to sort of honor every week we come to the table as different people, as different, and we have different things in our cells are actually being remade every week based on what we're taking in and what we're experiencing. Yet the food is still always there for us. It is one of the, George Dole actually in some of his writing, talked a lot about his hope the church would just always be there. That there's something about, even if there's nobody, even if it's dwindling, that there's something about it always being there, and there's something about honoring people in their need to go away, but that they can always come back. They can always come back. And there is something very powerful about all of our little faithful communities continuing to be church, continuing to serve the meal, and letting people come and letting them go and then come back again. We have some more comments online. Renee's bringing up the intention, how important the intention is. That intention is to link or connect with the divine, with others, and that there's some mystery that unfolds when we make that intention. And then BJ is bringing up the importance of music as a part of the communion service, how alive that makes the sacrament for her, and that for her husband, who grew up Lutheran, communion felt separate from everyday life, kind of this different thing that you do. And maybe it's like, maybe that's also sort of the mystery that we do. And I see this happening in a lot of churches. There's something lovely about having the church, having the altar, having all of the sacred elements and the sacrament happening there. But then it's also so lovely when you have the communion by the side of the lake. When during the pandemic, Ted and I took the boys on hikes, and we would sometimes have communion, and they would want to do it. It would often be their idea. Let's have communion on our hike, or seeing teens off on a pilgrimage and having communion in simple settings. And it's almost like it's actually more lovely because we have it in the simple setting, but then sometimes we have it in the big church, and it's another way that we can kind of maybe nod towards that idea of integrating it into all of life more often. Yeah. I'm thinking about another ritual that we take part in as a family, of just saying our prayer before dinner. And that was like a fight. Like there was a moment in our family life where I was like, is this going to stick? Because these, unruly children, and I don't know if we can, but it's stuck. And now they have, and sometimes it goes quickly and there's not a lot of reverence. Sometimes there's more of a pregnant pause where we really feel like, okay, we're here, we're going to eat something, it's sacred. And I think it was a good example for me of like the persistence that's necessary for things to be holy, commitment and persistence. And maybe that's another way in which the church holds the people, is sort of like by being persistent, by being consistent, showing up, and like a consistent parent, kind of like, and letting us kind of work ourselves out. Yeah, with that container, that at its best, the church can be kind of a container, and the sacraments can be a container to hold the ups and downs of the spiritual life in very profound ways. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes me ponder what contradictory things human beings are, right? Because every single time we make it's a tension. It's like, right, this tension between container and freedom, right? Like, need the container until it becomes confining or rote, and then we need the freedom. And then we need the freedom until we need the commitment and the habit and the return. I'm just like, oh wow, because for me, there's a sense of, can't we resolve this tension? It's like, no. This tension is us, and it's there for us. And I just, I'm just kind of the person who's like, but tell me what's the right way to understand it. And like, that's not the point. Like, what a blessing that
Yeah.
something like the Holy Supper and God and everything to do with God
Mhm.
can exist in such a useful, paradoxical way where what we need can be given. Um, wow, what a blessing that is, you know. And our job is just to show up and be open um yeah, that's there'll be the connection if we desire it. Yeah.
And that tension, I think, is very real and alive, and it's very much what motivated this discussion group, is that, this is a new church. There's that the world is changing, that that Jesus instituted this some thousands of years ago. The early Christians practiced it in a way that had meaning for them, and now all of these churches have evolved with different practices, and they've broken off and they've changed, and now here we are now. And we've been blessed to be shepherded into this sacrament and into community that celebrates it because of our stories, and other people have gone in different directions. And I just think that I feel like you've articulated it so well, that the whole point is a container with people in it that will change the container. That or necessarily must change the container. And I think that's one of the challenges that I think we really are right now in Swedenborgian community, is like, if the container is not work, if people are not showing up in this container, what are the new containers? What are the new spaces that are needed to maintain this ritual and this connection point? And it requires, it's just like how organisms grow. Like, we have to have, I'm a container, if my cells didn't all agree to be me, I wouldn't be me. Like, I'm really glad they've decided to be me, but I'm aging. It's going to change. There's going to have to be a new generation that's going to have a different container. And being in that dance, I think, is very challenging. And I think it's partly why many religious people over the generations have wanted to harden up, because they like you, Shada, they want to know the answer. They want to know, this is how it's always going to be. And probably a lot of the harm that has occurred over the generations has been because of that. Withholding, or this is what it is, this is what it isn't, instead of being in the dance. And I love that it's a meal. It is like almost necessarily unwieldy, because it's who's going to cook it, and who's going to prepare it, and where are we going to get the food from? And it's it offers a consistency, a thread that we can see, and we know it when we see it. We know it can, but it can look so many different ways. It can manifest in so many different ways. So I guess I'm feeling thankful that Jesus decided to institute the Holy Supper as, like, if there, these are the two, baptism and the Holy Supper are the two things, the two actual practical things that Swedenborg articulates will carry forward in the new church. That's it, just those two. Everything else is an internal reality, um, it's all much more about love and goodness and truth and wisdom and all the stuff that we can't contain in a ritual. We can't contain in any kind of external form. So the only two are these sacraments that are so fluid, or are so flexible, are so beautiful, and integrated into our actual human life. We need to wash ourselves and we need to eat. Those are, I don't know that anyone's going to argue that those are things we shouldn't do as human beings. Those are things we need to do to live. And they are sacred and they are holy, and the church can hold them in a delicate, beautiful, devout way, and is one of the vessels that holds the sacredness of those two acts.
Well, it strikes me their quality just speaks, like, one's a threshold and one's a cycle, right? Like, if there are to be two, like, not, forgetting about what they actually look like, but wouldn't those be, yeah, like the two most important things or qualities or states of a spiritual life, right? The moment of commitment, and then what maintains it. And like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
I
seems
dig
pretty
that.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely speaks to me of the understanding of correspondences that like, of course these would be the things we would do over and over again and make them sacred. They are, you know, it's embedded in our natural world and it's embedded in our humanity and our bodies and how we operate. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful that we've been doing it for so long. And I think it sort of calls the question of like, how will we carry forward these rituals? How will we hold the table? How will we continue to shepherd in the new generations of people into this this sacred life? And we'll see. I don't know. I don't know. I guess we're all figuring that out right now. Mm. Well, we're nearing the end of our hour. I wonder if either of you have a closing thought about communion as we finish up our time today.
Food for the journey, right? Food for the journey.
Yeah. I'm definitely hoping in the Swedenborgian world we can start to like really think about our liturgy. I do the same liturgy from the 1850 Book of Worship. You guys are 1979, so you're a little ahead of us in the Episcopal Church. We've had a few, I mean, and I think that within the Swedenborgian community, individuals have written things that have been lovely. Yeah, there's room for more language, I think, around the sacrament and its meaning and more or less, I don't know. Maybe we need less words. Maybe I need to focus just on the bread and the wine and let that speak for itself. But yeah, language that continues to hold this creative tension that has been articulated today around belonging, commitment, and openness, and the whole, how to weave that thread feels important.
Agreed. Yeah, I would love to see some new language.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I experience new language, it is a joy, right? Because it eliminates something new and different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so helpful. Again, that tension, the container with something that primes our attention is sometimes really helpful.
Right. And on the other side, it's not true for me, but it's true for a lot of people that I minister to. For many people, it's hearing the same words that makes it meaningful. It's hearing the same. And in the Episcopal tradition, the liturgy is it's written, it's done. It maintains the same thing every week. So that I guess that's just another place where that creative tension lives, is we like the familiarity of certain things. And it's a real challenge, especially as churches dwindle. The people who are left really like the thing that they always do and the words as they are familiar with, and yet other people maybe want different words. But I'm continuing to wonder if the reason there's a disconnect is less about the words, like I'm less interested in like the brand new fancy new liturgy. And I think in some ways it's because we're not communicating to new generations what it means to us. Like I really hope that maybe more than working together to write our 2024 Book of Worship, that we communicate to each other more the depth of the meaning of the ritual itself. Because I find I can worship with anybody. I can worship with any language, anything, as long as I feel that depth of meaning and that it really can come through. And it comes through the relationship, through the actual like communion of humans, doing it together. And sometimes maybe we miss opportunities to convey that deeper meaning, why we're doing it, and we just do it. And maybe there's space for that. I'm not sure. Anyway, this has been a very good conversation. Thank you for joining me, both of you, and for everyone online. And Renee offers a final comment. She loves your wording, Shada, of one is a threshold and the other is a cycle. And I think there is something very deep in that, that we'll have to keep digging in as we continue to try to be the new church in the world. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. And next week we take on resurrection. So we move on to stories of the afterlife, which are so central to our tradition. So join us then. All right. Thanks, Shada. Thank you, Ted.
So welcome. Take care.